Hello and welcome to Dateline New Haven. I'm your host, Paul Bass, inviting you to look behind the headlines on the stories that make Connecticut tick. Well, something's happening soon and you might be called up, folks, for jury duty. Not jury duty for court, not jury duty for crime, but jury duty to do better than the politicians in making decisions on how we run New Haven and Connecticut. Let me explain. There's something's about to start this summer in New Haven called the Connecticut Citizens Assembly. Connecticut Citizens Assembly. 100 people are going to be picked at random from the state, different kinds of people. They're going to spend their weekends almost like a jury, hearing a lot of information about property taxes and how to fund our public services, and then making decisions as though they were the lawmakers about how we should do taxes and how we should deal with property in Connecticut. It's part of a broader experiment into whether our political system is broken, whether our elected officials are falling down on the job of making good decisions in the public interest, and whether a better model can exist. So an old friend of mine, Cynthia Farrar, is in the studio today because she's been working on different iterations of this effort to have deliberative democracy for decades. And she's involved in this latest effort with a whole bunch of other people to do a Connecticut Citizens Assembly. Good morning, Cynthia, and thanks for coming in.
Good morning, Paul. I'm delighted to be here.
So how did you end up being involved in the Connecticut Citizens Assembly?
So the person at Yale, Hélène Landemore, who's a professor of political science and thinks about public engagement on the issues that affect us, asked me if I would get involved, given the prior experience that you mentioned, namely bringing a random sample of residents together to talk about a particular issue and hear from each other as well as from residents.
You know, it's so funny because this is a broad effort. You have Connecticut's CCM, Connecticut Conference of Personalities involved. It's not just a Yale thing. It's at Yale.
Yes.
So you got this Yale professor who's written this book now on this worldwide movement to have these civic assemblies, citizen assemblies. In fact, she said there are 733 of them in the last 20 years, that in Ireland, they broke the political gridlock on same-sex marriage, on abortion laws. She sat in on one, a climate convention in France. And I guess the basic idea here is, the way she put it, is that elected officials, and this is something you'll hear often from Tea Party people, you'll hear it from left-wing activists, you'll hear it from like no labels, the centrist people, everyone who kind of feels like the system's broken. And she's, I guess, in that category. She says you folks are looking for an alternative to elected officials who are bought by special interests, detached from real life, obsessed with re-election, but can then deliver on no big promises because the system doesn't work right, so there has to be a better way. So what is this better way? How does a citizen assembly work that does it differently?
So I think there can be different perspectives on the question of whether this is an alternative to the legislature. That's a conversation that we need to be having both at the state level and as a country about, as we think about the ways in which our democracy does and does not function. For me, the value of the Citizens Assembly is that it gives ordinary people, so-called, a chance to weigh in on an issue, in this case, where the inability of the legislature to actually address it is very clear. When I ran the citizens forums that you mentioned many years ago, in fact, at each of them, something related to how we fund local services was one of the questions, and very little has changed since then.
So am I right, Cynthia, that the point of the Citizen Assembly, it's going to take place in New Haven this summer, with 100 people chosen from all around Connecticut, is not just specifically what they're talking about, which is property taxes, but trying to see whether we can join this worldwide movement of having citizens get more involved in not just voting for people on election day, but in really thinking in a deliberative way, not just like answering a poll question, watching a 30-second video and saying, yeah, I like this, I hate this, but really talk about tough issues, and that we're going to see if you could start to build some kind of movement, it sounds like when I read the material, to have citizens eventually, because this is not obviously going to be binding, although it can influence people, right? You'll come up with ideas. But do you is this, am I right that this is kind of a hope that down the road that this turns into something where decisions are actually made that way?
Well, my hope certainly is that the state of Connecticut will start to use this kind of method in order to bring citizens, residents into the conversation.
I mean, because you say property tax has been an issue for decades in Connecticut that we feel it's unfair and helps the rich, all that kind of stuff. And that, but immigration, right? So the Democrats and Republicans in 2024 had a deal on how they thought in a thoughtful way that all different ideologically divided people could agree with. And then because of electoral politics, that was killed. Is that the kind of thing you're talking about? Being able to tackle big issues in a way where people talk about it and thoughtfully debate it, and that used to be our elected officials. And is the argument they can't do that as well as they used to be able to and strike compromises?
Yes, in part. I mean, I think polarization and the way that the rhetoric has evolved about issues is antithetical to the idea of actually coming up with pragmatic solutions. People get boxed into a corner. And the hope is that, and I've seen this happen myself, that a group of citizens brought together without that kind of frame, right? It's not them as Democrats or Republicans, but a mix of people who have a range of different experiences can actually think about questions in a way that is more pragmatic.
So you're going to do that by bringing 100 people and paying them, right, to come for a bunch of weekends?
Yes.
To New Haven for July through August?
Yes. You have to
September.
pay people.
And
it's
then how
really important if you intend to get past the usual suspects.
And how are you going to pick these 100 people?
So about 200,000 letters have been sent out already.
Like mail letters? Ones you have to open an envelope?
Yep, snail mail.
Talk about old-fashioned.
How about that?
Yeah.
And to a combination of samples. One is a random selection of voters. And the second is randomly picking zip codes from around the state. So those folks should already have received a letter, and maybe some of you who are listening will have received one. And the recipients are being asked to then, if they're interested, to fill out a brief survey, and then we will be randomly selecting from among the folks who say they're prepared to.
And it's hard to get stuff back. So if out of 200,000, let's say you get 1,000 back, which would be a pretty good return.
Mm-hmm.
Are you concerned that already might be a self-selecting group, like people who tend to open the mail? Is that also going to be people who tend to be having too much time in their hands, or or less suspicious of companies trying to steal things from you by sending you letters that you never heard of?
I don't think we can guard against that possibility. But given the sheer number that we sent out, and we were very clear in the invitation letter that people will be paid and that their voice will matter.
Interesting. That's fun.
Because you may know this, but the State Comptroller, Sean Scanlon, has committed to taking the results of these deliberations to the legislature.
Okay, so then let's get to a question I'm going to ask you about later. But how? So you can get these people back, and then you're going to randomly pick from the ones who returned?
Yes.
Because let's say it's a disproportionate group of liberal Democrats or conservative Republicans. Can you weed, or different zip codes? Will you be able to try, before you decide to be random, is it possible to make sure certain zip codes, that you have a variety of zip codes?
So the process is complicated, and a social scientist named Josh Calla at Yale is responsible for actually making this work. But the idea is to do sorting before you select the random sample.
To make sure it's diverse.
Exactly. On a range of factors.
Like zip code?
Not zip code, but on factors, some of which are directly related to the question that we're going to be addressing. So, for example,
property owner,
different parts of
renter.
Different parts of the state, whether you're a homeowner or a renter, and whether you have children in your household, since one of the key public services that are paid for with property taxes is
This is so interesting.
education.
And are you not going to ask party affiliation?
Yes. So in
No, it's a good
addition,
question. I wonder whether you would or not. Yeah.
well, we actually debated that question,
I gotta
Paul,
imagine.
but
Yeah.
we are.
This is
But-
so interesting.
But then that includes, of course, the unaffiliated,
Mhm.
right?
Which is the biggest group in Connecticut.
Right.
Yeah.
And people will have received the letter who are not only unaffiliated, but unregistered. Right?
So they're going to spend 3 months on weekends learning about the property tax, debating it, and if I'm correct, and trying to figure out what Connecticut should do about the reliance on the property tax.
Mhm.
Is one of the options to continue it?
Yes.
And
Yes.
walk me through why this is an important issue. You touched on it earlier, Cynthia. You said that we've been arguing about this for decades in Connecticut. No one seems to fix the problem about over-reliance on a property tax. What is the problem we're trying to fix?
So the property tax is the primary source of funding for the social services the services that we all depend on, not only education, but roads and policing and so on. And as you know well, Connecticut's divided into 169 separate towns and municipalities. Each of them has a different tax base.
Right, and the same car, if you own it in Greenwich, you could pay a lot less tax than you have a car
Exactly.
in New Haven.
And the places that have the lowest tax base also tend to be the ones that have to pay the most for some of those services,
Right.
including especially education, because they are diverse, like New Haven.
So there is an assumption in the way the question is framed that having the wealthy get a tax break at the expense of the poor is not a thing we want. We don't want to fund our
Well-
system by taxing the poor.
Well,
or
there's
working class
another
more.
perspective, of course, Paul, which is very much out there and will be considered, which is the advantage of relying on the taxes that you levy
Yeah,
is that you have control.
meaning that your town gets to set the mill rate, but then the towns
Not only set the mill rate, but one implication of starting to rethink the way we fund these services is, well, would it be better for local municipalities to pool their resources and deliver some of these services
regionalization.
together?
That's one of the big arguments always been.
Exactly. So that's sort of out there as one implication of trying to engage
Which is an
in
issue you've
reform.
dealt with really since David Rusk in the 90s
It
when he had the book
has,
about
yes.
regionalization. And
Yes.
you know what it made me think about when I was reading this morning? The person I don't have a position on this, but something I've always been so interesting every time these issues come up is Henry George.
Uh-huh.
So he was the late 19th century, there's an idea with someone with an idea could actually be a rock star, right? He was a journalist and then a political thinker who in the late 1800s had a whole worldwide movement centered here, I think, if it was England or here, that we should have the only tax you should ever do, the fairest way, the most just tax that even helps the fairest of the people who have the least means is actually a property tax, but a different kind of property tax.
Mhm.
Which is that said the only thing you should tax is land. Land shouldn't belong to anybody. But he said don't tax the buildings you put on land. If you have an investor, you want to increase the value, you can make that money. But it's still, he still has followers around the world, as you know. And that what do you think about that? I mean, that because the progressives in the 1990s and 80s and 90s in Connecticut, we all said we rely too much on the property tax. It's not fair. If you live in a rich town like Greenwich, you get a break compared to New Haven because so much of our property is off the tax rolls, and that's so true. And the solution was we should have an income tax, a progressive income tax, rather than rely so much on property tax. We got that passed when Lowell Weicker was governor. It was a coalition between the progressives, right, the progressive left, and wealthy in the end, Fairfield County people, because then the deal was they exempted capital gains, right? So then we kept changing it to do earned income tax credit to make it fairer. And right now, on the one hand, very poor people don't pay taxes, but on the other hand, the wealthiest people in Connecticut pay 3 times less in their total income percentage-wise in taxes, state and local, than working class people do. A bus driver pays 3 times as much taxes percentage-wise than a hedge fund owner in Connecticut. So how do you put that all together? Was Henry George maybe right? And are we wrong to just be thinking about the property tax this way?
Well, I would say, what allegedly people in Maine say when you approach and ask them for directions, which is, well, I wouldn't start from here. I mean, I think we have enough on our hands, really, at this moment. Not that I don't think that's a really interesting way to think about it. But this is meant to be really pragmatic. So here's the situation we have, and we're not going to fundamentally upend how we think about taxation in general, but we do need to think about whether it's fair, whether it results in efficient delivery of services, whether it incentivizes the development of land for various uses in order to up your capital list, and so on. So I think that the challenge for these citizens is already pretty challenging.
So you're saying to make it practical. And
Yeah.
you said the way you're going to measure the effectiveness of, you said Sean Scanlon, the controller, is going to do what with the proposal? He's going to introduce them as legislation?
He's going to take it to the legislature. He's going to request a public hearing at which these results will be presented.
And some of the people maybe will speak.
They will speak.
Oh, that'd be great.
Yeah.
And is there going to be, is the point at the end of this exercise to have a list of proposed legislation?
Yes. To my mind, it's also very important to try to inform the way the legislature understands what some options might be by making it clear what kinds of trade-offs people are prepared to face up to, and what they're, for example, how much more they're prepared in taxes in order to get better services, or in order to increase the fairness as between municipalities and so on. But yes, there will be people available to the citizens who will help them figure out, well, if this is what we want to achieve, then here's some strategies that you might want to consider.
We got a question from a listener. Thanks for writing in. Property taxes should certainly be on the table. So should the split between residential and commercial mill rates. My question is how much the tax structure is tied to overall government structure, i.e. lack of county government. You spoke about that a few minutes ago.
Yes.
You think the basis of this, and thanks for the question, you think the basis of this is really going to be about regionalization, the same kind of argument you were first dealing with in the 90s?
Not necessarily, but that's one of the potential angles if you're thinking about using the dollars efficiently, whether they come from the state or from local property.
And we're talking to Cynthia Farrar. She's one of the prime movers in this broad group of people. We're trying an interesting experiment in New Haven this summer. I can't wait to see how it works. I love everything you do, Cynthia, on this score with deliberative democracy. They're basically going to pick people who want to volunteer for paid jury duty, but politics jury duty for weekends, July through September. They're going to be the Connecticut Citizens Assembly. They're going to be randomly selected nutmeggers who are going to think hard and hear hard about how we tax property and fund public service, and if there's a better way. So the 100, what are they going to do those weeks? What's actually going to happen? Like, how many hours a day are they going to be put up someplace to sleep? Are they?
As of now, they're not going to be put up anywhere, and there will be 6 days in person, full days, and 2 full days online, spread out over that period. And so we're working on the format now. One aspect of this particular citizens assembly that is unusual is our plan is at the outset, very close to it, turning over responsibility for setting the agenda to the citizens themselves.
So they'll pick their leader, like a jury picks a leader.
They will pick probably a set of leaders, given that we're talking about 100, but they will all have input on, so which aspect of these questions do we want to pursue from a list of possible people to talk to about the implications of those ways of pursuing this.
Oh, so it's
which ones do we want to talk to?
So that you'll wait for them to decide which experts you're going to bring in, or do you already have a battery of experts?
We are going to be putting a list together in advance for sure, but letting them figure out, well, given how their own priorities are developing or the different concerns that are in the room, who do people want to hear from? And what kind of information and analysis do they want? And one organizational challenge here is that if we do that, as we plan to, then you're sort of for every session having to develop on the fly the materials and identify the individuals. Yes.
And then Elaine Landemore, we mentioned, with Swarm Movers, that it has a new book out about this. The basic argument here is electoral politics is broken. Democracy is not broken. We've just been doing it wrong. What's the evidence for that? Is that our inability to address immigration, our inability to address the deficit, or is it just the polarization that we're not talking to each other, but that would suggest that democracy is broken? Or how are we defining democracy?
Well, I think both of those things, Paul. I also think the fact that ordinary people think it's broken. It's sort of like a marriage. As soon as one party thinks it's broken, it is. I mean, we don't trust most organizations, but definitely not government. And so for people to see themselves as part of the process beyond voting or being a respondent to an opinion poll, as you mentioned earlier. I mean, we require so little of citizens. And so this is a chance for us to behave like citizens, really take on the issue together.
So this is an issue that has been the focus of a lot of your work throughout your whole career. 1985, you published a book, The Origins of Democratic Thinking. That book just has a new second edition out.
It does. And it has an introduction in which I talk about how the ideas of the ancient Athenians have informed what I've been doing ever since.
So tell us about that. What were those ideas that you think had value that you want to bring back?
Well, one really important idea, and it relates to the Citizens Assembly very directly, is the idea that if we want citizens to participate in a different kind of way, then we need structures that make that happen. And otherwise, people are, we're going to sort ourselves into groups that share particular characteristics. People with resources are going to dominate. And a range of questions are never going to get to the table.
What happened in Athens that you'd like to have happen in America?
Well, I mean, they didn't use election very much. They did use it. I mean, they were very thoughtful about how to use various different democratic mechanisms, but they picked people by lot for the council, for example.
So you weren't a career politician. You were picked at random to do your time, the way you do time in the military until
Yes.
we got rid of the draft. You were drafted to make decisions on what kind of issues?
Well, people self-selected then too, but not just on decisions about what to do, but also decisions about how to do it. So not only was there a council which set the agenda for a citizens' assembly, but there were also boards that oversaw things like the naval yards. I mean, they really asked people to step up, and this was their response to the difficulties of moving away from an aristocracy.
That it requires us to be citizens.
Exactly.
Or also have an aristocracy.
Exactly. And if we're in no sense, by any traditional measure, entitled to rule, we have to be equipped to rule. That's what we need to do, and also to be able to see ourselves in other citizens. So you rotate. You couldn't serve on a number of the boards more than once. So a very large number of people were able to participate.
So you've been getting you don't just write books. You've been involved in trying to see how this could work in practice. In the 90s, I had the pleasure of covering one of these events you did in
It was in the early 2000s.
early
but
2000s.
Yeah.
You brought people together to talk about the airports, New Haven Airport, and how they're divided, right?
Yes.
And how did you set that up? Because I'm thinking, comparing it to now, what you're doing with citizen assemblies. Was that a citizen assembly, and what happened?
It was a different model called a deliberative poll. So, I mean, to me, the details don't matter very much, except one, which is that deliberative polls last for a day or two. Citizens' assemblies really ask citizens to spend a considerable amount of their time.
What's considerable?
Well, in this case, from the middle of July until the middle of September, with eight day-long sessions and a lot of thinking and reflecting and getting your own information in between. So it's a very different kind of expectation.
So what happened when you did that? What did you conclude when you tried? Did it work out? Did people make smarter, more broad-based decisions? Like, what happened over
Yeah,
those
we
days?
were able to show that people learned about the issue in question. So in that particular deliberative poll, which we then started calling the Citizens Forum and attempted to institutionalize over a number of years, we talked not only about the airport, but also about the possibility of pooling our tax resources regionally.
So, and what did people come up with?
So, in the case of the airport, people learned and they heard each other. They didn't and weren't asked to come up with a very specific proposal on how to.
Because I always try to figure out how democracy. To me, Tweed New Haven Airport is one of the classic democracy arguments. So, is democracy a pure poll of what people think? Like, if 50.1% of any population has an opinion, is therefore the democratic answer to do what people think?
No.
Or is democracy who shows up and cares, and everybody gets to be heard, everybody has access to information?
Neither.
So what is democracy in the Cove with Tweed and the city?
So democracy is not people's opinions, raw opinions that you give when you answer the phone and do a survey, nor just the people who are particularly activated on a question. People from East Haven or the business community in Greater New Haven that wants a functioning airport or whoever. It is actually about bringing the full range of people who have a stake in an airport, or at least plausibly do, but are affected by it in different ways. And as you're suggesting, in very straightforward ways, right? And in the room on that occasion, people from East Haven said, do you have any idea what this is like for us? I mean, the parking, the traffic, the noise, So the question on the table was, do we have some kind of a shared interest? And how do we achieve that without trampling on the people who are most directly affected?
And what I always try, as a journalist, what I always struggle with is, I often hear from people in the Cove actually love the airport because they get to fly somewhere. And opinions have changed over time.
Sure.
And then people have, legitimate concerns, must like to live there. And people say, well, you put a house there. You said, well, but it's different now. They get, and they should, they stand up, the people who are most motivated to speak at a public meeting, the people most affected, so they show up. But then we had an election 2 cycles ago where an alder actually, that's always the big issue down there, but not the only issue. He was in favor of the airport expansion, and he won 2-1.
Mm-hmm.
But then how did he figure that out? It wasn't the only issue on the table. He was supported by Unite Here, which is the group that gets the most people out. So I always think it's an interesting question. Aaron Good writes in, Aaron, thank you for listening to the show. Writes in, I'm hoping the Assembly will engage the services of experts, consultants who specialize in spatial analysis and visualization of property tax equity for municipalities. Urban 3, that's one word, the number 3. Urban 3 is one consultant that comes to mind. And I see Cynthia's writing that down. Aaron, as always, has like fantastic specific suggestions when he listens to the show. Thanks,
so that's an interesting suggestion, Aaron, and I will add it to the mix. But yes, we want to produce analyses that actually illuminate
So you wrote
who's
this
affected.
book about in ancient Athens. There was this ethic of what it meant to be a citizen. We actually did your time to try to think out problems with your other citizens and come up with answers. You did the early 2000s, the Forums on Tough Issues New Haven. You started an organization that still exists called Purple States, where you say that we don't live in red states and blue states. You know, it's a lot more complicated than that, and every individual is more complicated than that. And you did reporting in the context of politics, and you still do, with video to try to get people talking together. What have you concluded from all of that? Was there anything you were wrong about that you learned about what it means to try to bring back deliberative democracy?
Well, the reason I started Purple States was because I had been hoping to institutionalize a citizens forum, which had this general shape of bringing a random selection of people together to deliberate and doing it over time so that a lot of people would get a chance to do that, and with the hope that politicians would start to think differently about the role that citizens can play. And that really was starting to happen. And more people came out. I mean, we got a higher response rate as it proceeded. But it costs money to do random selection, and it's a fairly heavy lift. I mean, I think it's well worth doing. There are ways to streamline it, but I couldn't sustain it. I couldn't sustain the funding, and in a way, I reached the conclusion that we would already have to have the sense that a group of people from the region ought to have a say on the issues that we care about in order to get the funding to keep that going. And it just wasn't there. So the appeal of producing short videos with a group of people who were very different from each other, in the earliest case from different primary and caucus states for the 2008 election, was to kind of distill this idea of getting a mix of people who are different across a variety of factors and give them a chance to learn together and cover the election. So
you were way ahead of your time, because now all that is done in video now. And something that's so antithetical to what you try to achieve with video is the way algorithms work. So everything you try to do is anathema to every algorithm.
I'm
Algorithms
afraid so.
Reward. Like I listen sometimes. I know with a guy who like listens to a lot of these shows, left, right, center. It's great. You get a lot of opinions. I can't stand it because people are just basically shouting each other and trying to see how extreme or assertive over substantive they can be in order to get more people to click, because that's the only way people are going to watch. Any thoughts after Purple States about how you deal with the kind of inherent contradiction between trying to use video and the way people are communicating with each other with the means that are working against it?
Well, this gets back to the point I was making about structures. You need a formal structure that cuts against our instinct to not only hang out with, but to agree with people who are, on the same social media platform now, but in all sorts of ways, don't span the range of people who really ought to have a say and who ought to be thinking together about it. So I think about it as trying to build a civic architecture into the way we associate.
And Helene, in her book, talks about watching these citizen assemblies work. And what she came away with is that the shy people get to talk, along with the alphas lower their voice and listen. Shy people get to be heard. And she talked about love. She talked about, sort of like Martin Buber almost. She's talking about hearing and seeing each other and talking to each other makes us see each other more as human. And then in that process, lets us hear each other better. My concern is whether, and you described all the efforts you're making with these citizen assemblies to make sure you're not setting the agenda. Right. You're not picking the experts. You're not picking how to frame the question. Because it seems like there's always an inherent danger that no matter how hard you try, you're trying to get people to the right conclusion. No?
Presumably there will be some people in the mix whose aim that is. It's not the aim of the process. And yes, we're only human, but we're trying to do everything we can to guard against that.
And I'm talking to Cynthia Farrar, one of the people organizing the Connecticut Citizens Assembly over 8 days, 6 of them live in July through September this summer. We're going to have people coming to New Haven from all over the state, random group, to try to tackle the issue of property taxes as our main way of funding services in a way that can do better than our elected officials have done on all ends. Our legislatures, in some ways, citizen assemblies, we only pay them part-time to go. We do have to pay them, but they usually have other jobs. And they do the whole notion of representative democracy. I mean, you know this better than I do, obviously, is that we don't all have time every day to figure out how to solve every problem and get all the research and debate it with people. We don't necessarily have the skills, but we have elections. And I agree with you so much that democracy isn't just elections, but that is our chance to see people who have told us how they generally want to approach things, and then they're going to do the work of debating it with other people and finding out what we think the best way to do it is. Then every 2 years for a legislature, except they changed that in New Haven, unfortunately, they come back before us, and then we could say keep going like this or not. Why is that not better than this random group of citizens who may or may not? First of all, I guess you're assuming that the random group will be just as smart and capable at debating and getting information if they are paid, have the time to pay attention as the people we elect.
Well, they certainly will if, certainly. I think they will if they're given enough time. And in particular, to do what citizens do best and ought to be doing, which is to set the terms of the discussion. And that's not happening, Paul. I mean, yes, we have a representative system, but from the very beginning, from the time of the founders, the vision was that it was the elected representatives who would do the filtering,
Mm-hmm.
who were initially, and because we elect them, are even now parts of the elite, construed in a variety of
Or they become that
of
if they
different
weren't
ways.
coming
Sure.
in. Yeah.
Sure. So I believe that citizens are capable of doing a lot of the filtering for ourselves, especially when it comes to articulating what's at stake for us and how to think about the trade-offs that inevitably we face, and how we're connected to other citizens and how we need to take them into account. And I mean, as we've been talking about, I think legislators and all the voices out there on social media and in politics at every level are really cutting against that ability to think about what's at stake for all of us.
You know, in New Haven, we didn't get a strong mayor until 1950s. And we always relied on citizen commissions and boards, unpaid, where people spend their time, and they're pretty good, like some of them. They don't always meet. But like we have a traffic commission, and we were deciding whether to put 2 blocks of Chapel Street one way from College to York. And they had to say yes first. It's actually the same people, police commission. They just changed their title at 7 o'clock from 6 to 7 to the traffic commission, 7 to 8 to the police commission. They're pretty smart, good people, Brian range of people. So the city officials had announced this street was going 2-way as part of our bigger traffic calming thing. And they just went pro forma at the end of the commission after the signs were up and said, you can't do that. We're in charge. And so that was part of the reason they didn't say yes right away. They voted down twice. But partly they thought it was kind of complicated. Like Yale Cops said, this can be hard for us to get the ambulances in. And other people said, we want to be safer across the street. We're not sure we're going to be safe in those 2 blocks that way with how narrow it is. And so after 2 rejections, they came back and redesigned it based on the concerns of public safety people. And I thought they actually came out to a better solution. Is part of what you envision more boards and commissions? Should we go back to a more, but the question is whether people really want to spend the time. Like, I don't want to go to those meetings at night.
No. No. As Oscar Wilde once famously said, socialism takes too many evenings. So, yes, but I think it's important to note that nothing about this process is intended to eliminate the need for experts and the importance of considering a range of different kinds of expertise, as you were just saying. I mean, Hélène likes to say that this process is about experts on tap, not on top.
Mm.
And so that's the idea. It's not so easy.
But isn't that true also for a legislature?
How so?
They bring in the experts, but they're not the ones, the elected representatives are the ones who still.
Yes, but as you were suggesting, I mean, one reason we tend to think that having an elite at the top is valuable and have them be professional and paid and spending at least a large chunk of their time doing this is that they develop a kind of expertise that isn't available.
So before I let you go, Cynthia Farrar, and I so much love what you do in trying to promote delivered democracy. I want to ask you if you're fundamentally going against the grain of either human nature or the way humans have evolved. Do people not want democracy? Do they want to get all the channels they can at home with extreme, recreational marijuana? It's just sort of like, do people just want to zone out and just have some kind of entertainer or all-powerful authoritarian figure just run things for them and put on a good show?
I mean, inclusive democracy, Paul, cuts against the grain by its very nature. I mean, because it assumes that we're all in this together and that all of us need to have some say that takes the general well-being into account. So does it cut against the grain? Yes. Does it cut against human nature? I think not, because, I mean, at least in a different way than you were suggesting, which is that every passion, every even prejudice is acceptable as part of the conversation, and different interests and so on. We're not asking people to be some form of platonic ideal. That's not who we are. The point is to provide a structure in which we can.
How much are people going to be paid?
$1,200.
All right. So if you want to make $1,200, or if you want to make Connecticut a better place, or if you want to make democracy stronger than it's been for quite a while, you can find out more about the Connecticut Citizens Assembly. They have a website. Just look up Connecticut Citizens Assembly. I found it, so you can find it just in Google. And this summer, they're going to come to New Haven, bring people together to try to do better in how we make decisions as a community. Cynthia Farrar, thanks for being in this fight on the ground floor since for decades. And I hope we're going to hear later about how successful it was.
Thanks so much.
And thanks, Harry Drost, behind the controls. We're going to take it out with the Afro-Semitic Experience, performing I Wish I Knew How It Would Feel to Be Free from the group CD, A Plea for Peace. This is Paul Bass inviting you to fly free with us all day and all night long at WNHH New Haven's home for community radio.